You're a fool, and so am I, and so is everyone around you. Look, if you want to live a meaningful life, you want to be okay with making a fool of yourself. You want to go after what you want regardless of how other people may perceive you. In today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization podcast, this is exactly what we talk about. So give it a watch, and I apologize in advance about the video. We tried to record on Zoom Cloud and it didn't really work out. But the knowledge and the audio is very powerful so that you can step into your inner fool and actually use that to grow into the person that you want to be. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Data Driven Actualization Podcast. This is Ege Reynolds, and I'm here
Numer.
with no last name. We added that to the show notes as well. And today, Mr. Numer with no last name, what are we talking about?
We are going to talk about a fun subject and personal favorite of mine. Why looking like a fool sometimes is actually some of the best things you can do for your own growth.
Right.
And what we mean by this is a lot of times we're afraid to be a beginner at certain tasks because we're worried about how we're going to be perceived when we're just starting an activity. Or we're afraid of doing something courageous because we're worried about how we're going to be perceived when we do that action and we don't do it quote unquote perfectly up to our standard. And
Mhm.
we really wanted to chat about, well, as someone who has made a fool of himself on
Mhm.
more than a few occasions, and really gained a lot out of it, it was something we decided we should chat about and really share our experiences, but also share about how it helped us grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this discussion was inspired by one of the coaching calls we're having in our community where, one of the guys wanted to start conversations with people he was interested in, but he was also intimidated by the fact that, hey, what if other people see me and perceive me as a bit of a clown who's trying something, and that was holding him back. And I think one of the interesting perspectives to consider about this is if you look at people that you truly admire, like people that we look at and go, there's something about this person that I can respect. Like people like Elon Musk, right? People think he's an absolute, like some people think he's an absolute clown. Some people think he's an absolute legend. And I think that's really the idea is you cannot be a legend without looking like a fool to other people. So if you want to live a legendary life, sometimes you will look like a fool. And one of the best perspectives you can have around that is like some of your most tragic moments in the moment will just be funny stories. Like if we didn't look like a fool at times, we wouldn't be able to record this episode. And I think like even the word fool, what does it really mean? It's just language putting labels onto a certain, oh, this is happening again. It's just language putting labels onto a certain experience. And the interesting thing about language is the moment we label something, we turn it from an experience that's like imagine you were watching a movie in 4K. A movie, don't think of don't think dirty thoughts, audience. Imagine we're watching this amazing movie in this IMAX cinema and it's in 4K. And then we can only send that footage to our friend in like black and white. That's kind of how language is sometimes, right? Because we have this beautiful experience. And then when we speak about it, it's like we can only communicate so much. Even with the languages we share, we still have a language barrier. And I
Yeah.
think that's where using a term like a fool, it means something different to everyone. So I think for the audience, I would first start with like when we talk about being a fool or a fool, what comes to mind for you? Because for me, what comes to mind is, someone who's a little bit goofy and fun to be around and maybe a bit unpredictable. And maybe for some people, that visualization is like someone who's ostracized, just crying in the corner. So I think knowing what visualization and experience accompanies to your label of a word is so powerful, because you get to see what that word means to you. And then we can shift the meaning around that word to help you see things a little bit differently. What comes to your mind when you think of the world like of being a fool?
To me, I used to read like a lot of classic English literature growing up. So,
Right.
Robin Hood and a lot of the more novels that involved the king's court. And so to me,
Right.
the fool just comes in the classic. It reminds me of the court jester.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's ironic, like to me, the fool is just someone who's there, who's having fun. And as such, the word itself doesn't have as many negative connotations to me
Mm-hmm.
as it's I've seen it often used by other people in language. And what you described about language kind of turning the 4K movie into black and white, it's actually related to the statistical concept called dimension reduction, where we
Let's
take
go.
where we take this high dimensional quantity that's quite complex, and we try and reduce it down to a lower dimensional quantity that best captures the information around it. So it's kind of like, imagine if you have a curve, a quantity represented by the curve, and then you just take its mean. So you're representing like something really big by one number.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the interesting thing is, when from what you described, it's almost like we're taking our experience, we're dimension reducing it, giving it to the other person. They're taking the dimension reduced word, and then they're dimension increasing it and extrapolating it. And so
Right.
in many ways, like, you're discarding information from what you want to convey, and then the other person is adding information that may not be the same information that you discarded.
Yeah.
And so it really does kind of tie into this idea of reframing, right? Because it goes, maybe what we mean by fool versus what someone else would interpret can be very
Mm-hmm.
different. And the reason this is just not like some esoteric rambling is because depending on how people interpret the word and the experience, that's going to determine their actions and beliefs and feedback they get from it. And then
Yeah.
that's going to determine how they show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how would you say, kind of reframing our perceptions and labels, how have you seen it change people's actions?
Well, first of all, language doesn't really make sense right now. But I think understanding what words mean to us is very important, and how that word separates us from the experience itself. And that goes for everything, right? Like, when does walking become dancing? You're kind of just moving in some way. But then when does moving stop and not moving begins? Because technically part of you is also like energy, right? So you're always moving, even though you're stopping at a traffic light. So it's like all these separations that allows us to categorize our experience. But I think what we want to be aware of is how we categorize that experience, because most people do that very unconsciously. Which is why looking at the word itself and just thinking of what that word brings up visually, brings up sensorially, brings up
Yeah.
in our experience, then we can almost like tap into the meaning of the word, not just as letters that we would like write down on a piece of paper, but also the whole full experience. And I think in terms of reframing, we can look at a word and almost like an ego state, we can look at a word and go, what are actually the positive qualities in this visualization? So in a fool, even if you think it's stupid, which what is stupid anyways? Like for example, one of the classic examples of this is like when you're playing around with a girl, she'll be like, "Oh, you're so stupid." But then that actually means she enjoys being around you 99% of the time. So is it bad to be stupid or to be called stupid? Like who knows? And I think extracting the positive qualities out of the words and going, yeah, maybe I don't want to be a fool, but I do want to be playful and fun and live my own life so that you're getting more accurate on the words that you're using. So your metric is better, but you still remember it's just the metric. So it's kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in some data, some like different data points, maybe sometimes the median's more meaningful than the mean, and then the standard
Yeah.
deviation's like even more meaningful. So it's kind of like that. I think you're changing which metric you're looking at and prioritizing by changing the label and reframing. But then you still need to remember, I'm still not looking at the whole data set, and neither
Yeah.
is everyone else. So the funny thing is, even if you're worried about being a fool, sometimes you're a fool when you don't think you are being a fool because the people around you think you are being a fool. And sometimes even when you're worried about it, other people don't care about it as much. So it's impossible to actually control when you
Yeah.
will look like a fool to others, which is why we
Yeah.
want you to dive into the concept.
Yeah. And I think primarily our examples will come from social situations because that's when one of the most common situations where people's perceptions are involved. But
Yeah.
the point you said about paying attention to the right metric is so important as well, because especially when we're starting out with, interacting with people, oftentimes the metric we just need to look at is, did I do it at all versus was I perfect? Like,
Yeah.
arguably, so much of our mental effort is spent on how perfect was I versus just being, okay, that's not really the relevant metric at this point. The relevant metric is, did I take action?
Yeah.
And, and then I think that also ties into this idea of differences in perception of how we feel the world judges us versus what other people's perceptions even are. And typically, there's also quite a big gap there where we always, I think it's called the spotlight effect, where we always think everyone is paying a lot more attention to us than they actually are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And also, people are never really judging you. They're just judging parts of themselves that they see in your behavior. So it's all just a projection. So you're never actually scared of other people's judgments. You're scared of your own judgment of yourself. And
Yeah.
then that's actually getting in the way of you doing the things that you want for yourself. So it's kind of like, you have the mind's operating system, right? And in your mind, it's like when you first buy a computer, maybe it's just empty, right? And then there's some programs installed on it by Basic. We've all had the experience where you buy a Microsoft computer and they just have installed a bunch of useless programs and you have to go like delete, delete,
Delete,
delete,
delete.
get rid of this. Yeah, get rid of this, please. And then they're like, are you sure you want to delete this program? You're like, yes, please don't ask me again. And it's the same thing with our own mental software is we have programs that are that feel like they've been installed there by default. And we never question to actually uninstall them. And what happens with a lot of these default programs is like they contradict each other. So imagine you're running a program that's taking up part of your CPU and part of your memory, and then you're running another program that does the exact opposite of what the first program was trying to do. So you're still taking up memory, you're still taking up CPU, but these programs are just fighting each other. And then you're not making any headway in terms of the task you were trying to accomplish to begin with. And I think that's what happens for most people with the spotlight effect, with anything. Like they might even feel, wow, being in a social environment and just thinking about the act is like exhausting. Why? Because there's all these programs that are running. And on the outside, they're not really doing anything. But on the inside, there's a lot that's going on, which is pretty inefficient. Like if you were an engineer, you wouldn't spend 4 hours writing one program and then 4 hours writing another program that
That does
just
the
did the
exact
exact
opposite.
opposite. And then you're
Yeah.
like, let me run these programs. This is a good use of my server time and my CPU and my AWS subscription. Let's just overload the server. You wouldn't do that, but we don't realize it's the same process in our mind that's constantly happening. And that's actually what exhausts us from getting the life that we want, from living the life that we want to embody, from being a fool. A fool is really someone who has so much courage, who has let go of some of these programs, who can just go, well, let's see what else I can allocate this empty space. Let's see
Yeah.
what type of other programs I might run. Oh, when I run this program, I don't know how I feel about that one. That was a bit crazy. Maybe let's not run that again. Okay, let me try this one.
Yeah. Um, well, that's exactly what it is, right? Because what, for example, anytime you're learning a new activity, in my case, it was like jujitsu, right? I showed up getting absolutely thrown around by like everyone, just getting tapped left, right, and
Right.
center. And I'm sure to some people, I looked like a fool who, didn't even know how to retain his guard and just gave his back in like the first 15 seconds and then just got tapped out
Yeah.
repeatedly. But the point was, if I hadn't gone through that phase, I wouldn't have learned how to get better at retaining my guard. I wouldn't have learned how to get better at
Hmm.
any of these skills. And in many ways, these negative training examples are equally as valuable as positive training examples. Like you need a balanced data set in order to learn how to make good decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and so, really, like the experiences where I looked like a fool were arguably some of the best learning experiences because they were the ones that gave me the most insight.
Hmm.
Um, Another one comes to mind where I was talking to someone and we'll just make up a name. She was like, "My name is Sarah." And I was so flustered in the moment. I was like, "Hi, my name's Sarah," as I shook her hand. And I was like, wait, no, your name is Sarah. My name is Numer. Um, and, in that moment, did I make a fool of myself? Yes, but it didn't really matter
Yeah.
because to me, that making a fool of myself didn't have that much of a stigma around it. And that wasn't really
Mhm.
the metric I was going by. As a result, it didn't even matter to other people. Like,
Yeah.
we're really getting into that territory of when you can own being the fool. It actually really changes the way people will even perceive you. And
Hmm.
that's what's really powerful about it is if you don't own, quote unquote, being the fool, then you may find yourself getting more negative reactions from people versus when I went into my jujitsu gym being like, okay, like I'm going to get tapped out repeatedly by all these blue and brown belts. They actually were the guys who'd been through it already, were also some of the most supportive guys about it. They were like, no, you have good instinct, you were doing this well. And so really, one, there's you can make more peace with it yourself, and that's going to make you more willing to learn faster. But I think the other part also is that when you're not afraid to quote unquote be a fool, you actually attract high quality people in your life, because those are the ones who see that you're trying, and the ones who come and give you positive encouragement for the fact that you tried, instead of coming and making fun of you and putting you down. To me, that's one of the strongest predictor of someone I could be really good friends with.
Yeah, fool recognizes fool.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how it is. Yeah, it's so interesting with the story you shared about, oh, I'm Sarah. Oh, I'm Sarah too. Because those type of things happen when we try something new. And it's more like there's a level of innocence attached to that process. Like maybe you just didn't know, or you got too caught up in your head, or you thought it'd be a good idea to show up to a bachata class with 2 years of experience while everyone spoke Polish. That's not coming from personal experience at all. So again, this comes down to having this almost love and acceptance for ourselves in these situations and understanding that if you can accept that you can look like a fool sometimes, that's something a lot of people respect because people know, like naturally, a lot of people have empathy, right? So when they see your situation, they can kind of put themselves in your situation. And I remember, a few weeks ago, show up to this bachata class. Registration was a nightmare. You had to download the app, and I didn't have a Polish phone number. You know how it goes with sometimes like you go
Yeah,
to a country and their process is designed for you living in the country, and then you come in and they're just like, I guess maybe this could work.
yeah,
And as I was in the class, I was like, I look so stupid right now, probably, because I can't understand what the guy is saying without looking at him. And this class is also way above my level. And I thought it was just a bachata class. Like, I thought, okay, maybe it'll be like a little bit below or a little bit above. I didn't know they had 2 years of dancing experience. So I'm just here looking
yeah,
like a flamingo, trying not to fall into whatever situation I was in. You know how flamingos walk, their legs look like a little bit wobbly. That's how my moves look like.
yeah,
And I thought, you know what? How many people can actually place themselves in this situation? Like, how many people would be in a foreign country and decide, I'm going to try to find this class, I'm going to show up, even if it's not in a language I understand, I'll see what I can do. So, you rotate in dance class, right? So when we rotated, I was like, look, I don't understand Polish. I'm a bit slow. Yeah, sorry. But I'm here to have fun. And everyone I talked to was really nice because they could see that I was putting myself in an uncomfortable situation. And usually people who have done the same can recognize a time in their own life where they've done that. So they have that empathy for you. And people who may throw in judgments for what you're doing, they're usually also the people who are so scared of risk themselves that they have never tried to be a fool or leaned into that. And that was the problem for them.
yeah, exactly.
And we have lost Mr. Numer. This is a perfect accompaniment, if that's a word. If it's not, it should be. But this is a perfect meta message to the podcast we're running. Oh, Mr. Numer with no last names back.
Some technical difficulties on this side,
That's
but
right.
as I said, I'm not afraid to look like a fool with terrible Wi-Fi.
That's right. That's what I was talking about too. Yeah, I think the whole message is, again, we get better at things by putting ourselves in situations where we kind of look like a fool sometimes. But then at the same time, as you stop paying attention to certain words, they just almost fall out of your library. Like until, our student asked this question, I don't remember the last time I even thought of the word fool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, beginner or silly maybe would be, or goofball would kind of be the words that would come to my mind, and would just be like, it would almost be the comedy of the situation would be something that I would always laugh at, um,
Yeah.
versus being, and also I think it's, as someone who's tried a decent number of things and made a lot of like elementary errors when trying new things, it's like at some point you just learn to desensitize them yourself to them, because there's
Mm.
been times where I've been in like a statistics class not knowing something super basic, and the person
Mm.
showed it to me and I was like, all right, fair enough, like my bad.
Yeah.
um but I think there's something very powerful as well about being willing to ask these quote unquote foolish questions, right? Because it's happened a few times where I've been in meetings and something I thought that was a basic question was also a question on other people's minds. And when you
Mm.
almost aren't afraid to ask these basic slash foolish questions, you're building a very good first principles based understanding of activities that you're trying to learn. And then that first principles based understanding also takes you very far in achieving mastery in those activities or proficiency. And so, I really think there's a lot to be said for not being afraid to look like a fool or ask those questions that you're worried that make you look like a fool, because so many times again, like being in jiu-jitsu, learning a technique, being like, okay, where exactly do you, let's say, squeeze for a choke, or which
Mm.
joint do you bend? There's so much nuance there, and oftentimes what may feel like a basic question to you is actually an incredibly nuanced concept involving
Mm.
some biomechanics or something. So, I feel like we've been hammering the point quite a lot, but there's a lot of treasure to be found in just not being afraid to do things that make you look silly and going after them, as well as learning from those experiences.
Yeah.
And, as long as you have a good heart and do it with good intentions, there's a lot of forgiveness there for making errors, making a fool of yourself, and typically people will only celebrate you.
Yeah. Yeah, the world's actually a very forgiving place. It's usually those viruses in the operating system that we talked about that make us believe, oh, if I make this mistake, like people are gonna look at me and start laughing. Like that never really happens.
Yeah.
I don't remember a situation in which that happened. It may happen to some people, maybe once or twice, but then that's just a matter of probability. Like if you do something long enough, if you try it so many times, there's maybe like a 0.01% chance that one of those times someone says, "How dare you talk to me?" Or
Yeah,
I don't know, something. You see, it's not even coming to my attention anymore. And I think that's where the like really shutting down all those unproductive programs, but then also being aware of the language and how it creates labels is so important, because then if we can kind of remove the labels around these words and find the meaning within those words, like what values we want to take away from them and what we can just let go of, then it's like the mind and the life becomes more peaceful.
yeah. And to clarify, we're not here saying we've never done anything, quote unquote, like a beginner or like a fool. Like there's definitely some podcast episodes where I've been like, what am I doing? And I think
Mhm.
really what we're saying is the framing around it is what's different that allows us to it all not beat ourselves up, but go along the lines of, okay, what's the joke? The first 100 are a warm up for podcast episodes.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
it
Yeah. Blow out,
allows
blow out, blow out, blow out.
um, like a cheap paper bag.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so really it comes down to framing and just a willingness to get up and try again.
Hmm.
And I think having spoken to people who are very good at what they do in different fields, I think it's always been there's the level of just courage that people had and the willingness to fail again and again until they found their way. Um,
Hmm.
and in many ways, that willingness to fail and get up and the courage to try again is what made them great. It's what made them see facts or patterns that other people wouldn't necessarily have been able to see. So I really think there's a lot of almost greatness to be achieved or hidden underneath these experiences where we're afraid of looking like a fool.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's like in every moment where we may risk being a fool, what if we risked stepping into greatness? What would
Yeah.
happen if we changed the wording around that? And how would we actually feel if that was the wording that we're using? Like, is there ever a moment where someone's scared to look foolish, where at the same time they're not stepping into something that scares them, that allows them to be great? So that's something to think about. And maybe being a fool or looking like a fool is the pathway to the life that you want.
And repeatedly not being afraid to look like a fool is the pathway to the life that you want. Because again, so many times I've seen it, right? Like for the first 100, 200 attempts at whatever you're doing, let's say mastering a new shot, it's like
Mhm.
people or the wrong people in your life maybe will tell you you're looking like a fool. But the moment it starts landing and you're seeing success with it, people will be like, okay, what did you do? Teach me, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it's quite interesting how repeatedly that you see that pattern,
yeah.
where
It's
I think
crazy.
you've seen it in your life, I've seen it in my life. Um,
Mhm.
and so a lot of times, I think what keeps us from having the impact that we could have is our unwillingness to look like a fool.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember back in college, I was pretty scared to socialize with people. And I thought, oh, if I compliment someone or if I, go join someone for lunch or dinner at the dining hall, then people wouldn't like that. Like I would feel a bit like I'm infringing in their space and in their experience. So I thought it'd be a good idea to challenge myself to start doing those things and speaking to people. And I remember a few of the people in my circle were like, why are you doing this again? Like, what's the point of talking to all these people and, challenging yourself in this way? Until it was my 21st birthday party. And I hosted this like cool party at my friend's house where we played
First
some
time
board
legally
games.
drinking alcohol.
I don't know if I drank at that time. Maybe.
There.
I don't remember. Um, but we we organized this thing, and at that time I was seeing this girl who was like double majoring in psychology and neuroscience, like super intelligent, super interesting, really good personality. And she was like half Asian, half European, so she was also really beautiful. And I remember, we're at my birthday party, and then obviously I invited a lot of different friends. And some of my guy friends were like, "How do you meet her?" And I told them, "Hey, I was walking back from class one day and I just saw her sitting at the bench, and honestly, I was quite scared. Like I had to take an extra lap before I decided to go say hello because then the nerves were kicking in. And then eventually I thought like, you know what? I don't want to regret this moment. Let me just go speak to her. And that's how we met. And until that time, people were like, yeah, what you're doing is a bit strange, or, we don't know, like, what's the point of this? The same people are like, dude, you need to teach me how to do this. Because now they saw how life looked like and the outcome and what's possible. Because everyone wants connection. Everyone wants to be courageous. No one goes to bed at night and thinks, man, I wish I could be more of a coward. No one really thinks that like that. So the way to step into courage is by looking like a fool. And if you accept that you're going to look like a fool as you find your own courage, then you'll be just fine. What's more foolish is to be so scared of other people's opinions that 20, 30, 40 years down the line, you go, I wish I lived a different life. Now that is being a fool. So really being a fool is not necessarily a momentary experience. It's a moment of regret that hits you when you're afraid to look like a fool in those small experiences.
Yeah. And, I'm sure you can attest to this as well, that up until you experience that turning point for yourself, meaning you go from being made fun of to guys being like, or whoever in your life being like, okay, how did you do that? It can be quite a lonely road. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you should take this moment to plug, you know what I'm talking about.
Our foolish community,
Yes.
the community of the fools. The
Our
what's
our beautiful, amazing, uh supporting, caring group.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, so basically, if you want to be around like-minded fools in this journey and you want to look foolish all together, where we celebrate you being a fool, then we have this community called the Data-Driven Actualization Community, where we help you with coaching calls. We have accountability built in through tech and gamification and data. And we also have a private library of knowledge where we can teach you maybe slightly better ways of looking like a fool so that you're still making a fool of yourself, but at least you're learning from the experience and making a more fun fool of yourself over time. So if you want that, just DM me on Instagram about this and we can send you the details. But really, this community is about about putting you around people who can actually celebrate you for this, right? Because what you said, Numer, is so true. Is very few people can actually stay motivated when we feel like the world is against us. It's just like a psychological bias that we don't want to be ostracized from the tribe. And what kept me motivated at that time was I just had this long-term thinking, like if I look like a fool for 5 years, it doesn't matter. Like I was 20 at that time, and I was like, if I completely fail for the next 5 years, I'll be 25 and it wouldn't matter. So why don't
Yeah.
we just try? And so far it's worked out just fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I think it was kind of just like, I'm going to prove people wrong, which,
You took the arc of the anti-hero.
yeah. Um, but, that belief served its purpose. And now, having kind of been both down the dark side path and now the light side path of doing things with community, with support, I really can quite confidently say doing it with support, doing it with positivity, doing it with community versus doing it with pain, doing it with anger, resentment. One is the positive one is by far a much more peaceful and superior approach.
Yeah.
Um, Really, every way in terms of sustainability, in terms of how much joy you feel while working towards the goal as well. And even though sometimes it may not look like it on a short term horizon, um, so, for example, if you really want to cut weight as quickly as possible, you can just do 1,000 calorie deficit, and within a month, you will look leaner. But then if you kind of try and extrapolate out to how life would look like, doing that over a long-term period is going to be quite harmful, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, and so, obviously, not medical advice. Um, and so, again, when you do things positive from a lens of positivity, support, community, maybe within the first week or maybe within the first month, the results may not be faster. But if you're willing to look at it over a longer time horizon of 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, the
Mhm.
results will actually be faster in that time horizon and of a much better magnitude.
Yeah. And that's why we structured our business in this way, right? Someone asked me yesterday, actually, what if I work with you guys one-on-one for a few months and then I still have work to do? What do I do then? And I told him, hey, we have this community and it's so affordable that if you wanted to, you could stay for 10, 20 years. Um,
Yeah,
and we're going to be building upon that. And then we have the one-on-one for times you just want to go really all in. So you're
yeah,
actually never out of support if you want support. And I think that's so important because, in the journey of stepping into looking like a fool, there'll be certain things you'll step into. Maybe at first it's like for my journey, it's like I'm overweight, I need to go to the gym. So even the act of going to the gym, I'm like, what are people gonna think of some fat guy being in the gym, right? And then it was like, I don't know how to talk to people. Let me learn how to talk to people. Then it's like, okay, I figured out how to be healthy relatively and how to communicate, but my internal world is still pretty similar. It's a lot better, but how do I find peace and spend time in states of love? Okay, let me go really explore meditation. Oh, I realized I can sit in emptiness for like 2 hours, but then life feels very empty. Oh, let me integrate my shadows. So there's levels to this journey, and you're gonna need support. And the deeper you are in the journey, the harder it will be for you to find the right person for that level of support. Because the deeper you go, the less people there are who actually understand your experience
Yeah.
of life. And that's why if you can conjoin forces, is that a word? If you can come together with other fools, you'll just go a lot further.
Yeah. And I think another thing is every time we kind of move up levels, in many ways we just accept that we're going to look like a fool again, right? Like I'm sure when you were doing shadow work, doing it the very first time, it's like, or even for me doing my first twim sit, I was just like, what am I even doing here? Am I even like 6Ring properly?
Yeah.
Um, and same with, a lot of times reading studies, I was just like, wait, what is this most basic thing that I feel like I'm supposed to know, but now I have to sit and Google around? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, there's this theme of really looking like a fool never really goes, or if you're living a life where you're challenging yourself, looking like a fool never really goes away. It's just you change your relationship to it and you welcome it as a sign that you're challenging yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You change your perspective around it. And there's a
Yeah,
reason the king had the jester. Like, why would you have a jester, right? If it
yeah,
served no purpose, why would it be there? The king could have anyone. Why did he have a fool in his trusted circle? Because fun is necessary. And if you're not making a fool of yourself, your life is probably not that fun. So go have some fun.
yeah. That's a good note to end the podcast on. Any
I
closing
agree.
thoughts?
Closing thoughts? No, not really this time. What about you?
Yeah, me neither. I think having a community of like-minded people who aren't afraid to have fun and look foolish in the process of doing it, and who'll celebrate you when you push yourself outside your comfort zone is very, very important. And so endeavoring to find such positive people in your life has been something, or quote unquote high ROI of my time, but something deeply fulfilling and satisfying as well. So I'd
Hmm.
highly recommend finding such amazing people in your life as well, or the listener's life.
Right. That's right. Yeah, me as well. The foolish thing to do would be to think you can do this alone.
Yeah.
And that will, is it possible? Yes. Is it efficient? Probably not. So learn from people who've been through the journey. And that's why we're doing this podcast. So thank you for listening. If you have any topic suggestions, drop them in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell us what is a foolish moment you had in your life so far. Give us a story so we can celebrate with you. This is Ege,
This is Numer.
and this is the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. We'll see you next time.